Hi, I'm John, welcome back. Now today I'm making an Australian classic, a delicious beef pie. Now to start, I've got a few veggies in front of me and of course the beef. So here I'm using a blade roast. It's really whatever kind of slow cookish kind of meat you can find in the supermarket. But yeah, I'm going to start by chopping this up. I'm going to chop up my vegetables and some garlic. I'm going to use my favorite method when I slow cook things and make kind of sauces and stews, because basically this is pretty much a stew. Instead of spending ages chopping up my onion, carrots and celery really small, I like to chuck these into the food processor and it creates a really nice fine kind of chop. You don't want to turn it into mush because that's just yuck, but by getting them nice and finely, you can chop it by hand if you want to, but by getting a nice and fine kind of chop, it kind of builds up the sauce and really breaks down and gets nice and sweet, and you get a lot of flavor from these veggies. So yeah, I'm gonna process these. I'll be back in a sec. All right, so I've processed my onion, carrots and celery, and this is perfect. This is just nice and quite fine, and this will just dissolve nicely and blend into the sauce. I've also just really roughly chopped my garlic, so I've used about 5 kind of cloves. These will also just dissolve into the sauce, so I'm not too bothered about cutting those too much. Now with the meat. So I'm just gonna kind of dice this into about 1 inch, 3-ish kind of centimeters. You wanna look for something, generally you wanna use a chuck kind of steak. Something that has some nice marbling through it. This has some nice areas of marbling and some bits of the fat. But yeah, I'm just gonna kind of chop this into bits, and then the aim is once you slow cook it, you can kind of pull it apart with some forks a little bit just to kind of combine it with the sauce. So I'm just gonna go through and chop it. Now as well with a meat pie, you want to have a really nice rich color. So a nice dark color. You don't want any gray coloring in there. So to do that, you wanna really nicely sear your beef. So I'm gonna cut this, and then I'm gonna move over to the stove and give it a nice sear in some olive oil, salt and pepper. All right, so we've moved over to the stove, and I'm going to use some nice chili infused olive oil. This is gonna impart a really nice flavor into that beef. Nice flavor of chili and some nice heat. I'm also just gonna use a drizzle of just normal olive oil as well. So we really wanna wait until the pan is nice and hot, just to get some really nice color on that steak. That is exactly the sound that we want. Now I'm going to brown these in different batches. If I put them all in at once, everything will start to steam and not actually brown. By getting a nice color like this, I'm going to flip them all over. All right, so now that steak is all nice and brown, and I'm going to move on with my vegetables. Now I'm gonna just add this straight into the pan. If there's a lot of fat or oil, you can remove some of it, but keep a little bit in there just to help render down and slowly soften out those vegetables. So this will probably take about 5 or 10 minutes just to slowly cook down. Once it starts to get a bit softer, I'll add in my garlic, and also it can be a good time to add in some salt, pepper. I'm gonna add in some dried rosemary leaves too, just to start building up that flavor. I also like to add some ground cloves to this as well, just to add some extra nice, almost like a meaty flavor and some richness. Now, if these start to get a little bit dry, you can always add a little bit of water just to help moisten it up. You don't want it to get too dry and start burning. All right, so we're looking pretty good. Optionally too, I like to add some mushrooms just for some extra veggies, and they kind of go all nice and soft and cook out slowly. Again, this is completely optional. I'm just gonna kind of chop these a little bit with the tongs just to break them into smaller pieces. Now these will also need a few minutes just to kind of get a little bit soft and cooked. You can move on, but I find that everything is much more flavorful and just combines more nicely when you saute these in a bit. All right, now once the mushrooms start to get a little bit softer, spread everything apart in the middle and create a space for the tomato paste. Now I like to add about 2-ish tablespoons. This will add a nice rich tomatoey flavor, but it's important to cook out the tomato paste before moving on, because the tomato paste can get really kind of bitter and it just needs to be cooked out. So after it starts to bubble and dry up a little bit, I'll mix it in with the rest of the vegetables. All right, so now this is all looking good, it's mixed in. I'm going to add about 1/3 of a cup of flour. Now this flour is really going to thicken the sauce and help hold everything together. This is very important in the pie. You do not want a runny stew inside, otherwise it will go all over you when you bite into it. So you want a nice thick sauce. So the thing with the flour is you want to mix it in before you start getting too much liquid in there. So I'm just going to cook this for a good few minutes. You do not want any raw flour taste in here because it will be not very nice. So I'm just going to continue mixing it and sauteing this until there's no more flour smell and there's no more white bits of flour. And as you'll see, this will start to get quite thick. All right, now I'm going to add about a tablespoon's worth of Worcestershire sauce. This adds a nice sweetness and some more meaty flavour to the sauce. All right, so this is looking really good. Now it is time to start hydrating things again and building up that sauce. So I have some red wine here. Something nice and heavy. Feel free to use white wine if you would like to. I'm going to add about 2 cups here to create a nice rich sauce. This red wine adds a lot of delicious flavour. This also helps to create a nice dark and rich sauce. Now I'm just going to cook this for a few minutes, start breaking down those vegetables and get that flour mixture completely dissolved into the sauce. It also can be good to cook off some of that alcohol so it's not too bitter. Now that the sauce is starting to build up too, I'm going to add in 2 bay leaves for some flavour and 2 little bits of thyme. You can also add some fresh rosemary if you'd like to, but I've already added some of my dried rosemary leaves. Alright, so this is cooked down really nicely, so it is time to add this beef back in. Now you want to add all of that delicious kind of sauce and juices that come off the beef. It may look a little bit gross, but that is where all the flavour is at. So I'm just going to mix this together and we'll move on to adding some beef stock. Now you only want to add enough beef stock to basically cover the meat. You don't want to add too much because again you don't want a saucy mix. You don't want the mixture to be too runny. Now as you can see, this starts to thicken up quite nicely with all that flour in here. But as this sauce cooks, it will get thicker and thicker. Now depending on the cut of meat, you can kind of decide how long you'd like to cook this for. I'd say a good time is about 1.5 hours. And for me, I'm going to cook this in the oven. So I've started on the stove and you can continue to simmer this on the stove just on a low heat. But personally, I find it's easy in the oven. I stick it in at 150 degrees Celsius and I can walk away and come back in about 1.5 hours without worrying about it, without worrying that it's going to dry out too much or overflowing or anything like that. You can use whichever method you'd like. This is mine. And yeah, I'll see you guys in about 1.5 hours. Okay, so I've cooked this for about 1.5 hours. I've just let it cool a bit out of the oven because I'm going to shred it, and also when we actually assemble the pies it needs to be a bit cooler. You can't do it hot, otherwise things melt, it's messy, it's hard to handle, but it is looking delicious. It is so nice and rich and dark and amazing, exactly what I'm looking for. And it tastes amazing too. All I'm going to do is I'm going to scoop out all of the meat. I'm just going to pop it on my plate here and I'm going to just shred it up a little bit. You can see some of this meat, like this is actually already falling apart. But some of these bigger chunks, you can kind of press down on it, but it's easy with 2 forks just to kind of split it a bit. You don't want any like massive pieces in your mouth when you're trying to eat the pie. You want little pieces, and when it's shredded, the flavor of the sauce all comes up and, you know, blends in with the meat. It's just amazing. So I'm going to take all the meat out, I'll shred it, and then I'll add it back in. All right, so I've shredded up that beef and I've added it back into this pot, and this looks amazing. It is the perfect amount of sauce. It's a good, fairly solid consistency. It's not too runny, but I just want to run through a couple of things. If yours is not looking like this, firstly, if it's too wet, you can just add the pot back onto the stove and just simmer it for another 15-20 minutes just to get some excess liquid out of it. The other thing, you want it looking quite nice and rich, like that's how a meat pie is supposed to look. And if it's like really light and grey, I don't know, it's all personal preference, but it probably won't be maybe look as appetizing. a way to get around that, I mentioned earlier, is searing the beef well and getting some color. But also, you can cheat a little bit. It's not probably traditional, but you can add a little bit of soy sauce or dark soy sauce, and I mean like a bit less than a tablespoon's worth. That rich color will add more dark color to this. So yeah, there's some options for you if you want some more color or if you want it a bit drier. Yeah, anyway, I'm gonna let this cool down a little bit more and then I'll be moving on. So I'm gonna make separate pies today, and I have my single pie tins here. You can make your own pastry. I'm just gonna use store-bought frozen puff pastry. It's as simple as literally letting it defrost a bit, putting it in this, the pie mixture, and then some on top and cooking it in the oven. Simple as that, but I'm gonna let this cool down a bit more before we get onto that. Okay, so my meat has now cooled down and is a nice room temperature to assemble these pies. So I have got 4 tins here, so I won't be able to do all of these at once, unfortunately. You can either make a big pie or small pies using tins like this, or you can get disposable foil tins, which are a bit easier. So with these, it's pretty simple. I just get this out of the freezer and you just have to let it wait for a few minutes and it defrosts and it becomes very easy to mold and move. But I'm gonna fit 2 of these pie sheets on each, and you can see I've cut lines very, very roughly around these pie tins. So I'm gonna get 2 bases out of 1 sheet, and then I'll be able to get from 1 sheet 4 tops for the pies. They seem to be pretty soft now. I'm just gonna peel away these unwanted corner bits, and then basically just grab these bits, which I'm gonna use for the base of the pie, and basically just sit them in the pie and gently press down. So these can stretch a bit and will move. And yeah, you just want to have it flat against the bottom and then coming up the sides. So once it's pressed down nicely and overlapping the sides, you just want to make sure that it folds over slightly of this rim of the edge. And then I'm just going to cut away just this excess. Next, I'm going to just spoon the mixture directly into this pie tin. So we want to get the mixture in to about the top and make sure it's all pressed down nicely so there's no air bubbles or open bits. So we want to fill it all the way to the top. And it's really as simple as that. So I'll set that to the side and I'll get on with the rest of them. All right, so I've got my 4 pies now. If you notice that the puff pastry starts to get a bit soft and floppy anytime, you can pop it back in the freezer just for a few minutes. That really helps and just firms it up again, because it gets floppy and just goes everywhere. So I've got my 4 bases here, and you can see they're nice and full. I've pre-measured this. I haven't cut it yet, but pre-measured, and I know that there'll be enough space to fit across the 4 of these. So I'm basically just going to cut these into squares, or 4 squares, just like this, and I'm literally just gonna plop them on top. Now again, you can see that they're a bit too big, but I'm just gonna chop off these corners in a minute. So you just kind of want to go around and seal them off a little bit to stop any meat going out. So again, push gently down to get out any air bubbles. And sometimes it's just easier to use scissors and chop these sides off. So you can give these a bit of a pinch together just to stop any filling from coming out. And if you want like a nice little edge, you can use the fork just to go around and make sure that it's nicely attached. So round, round, round. And then it's good just to poke a little hole in the top to let out any excess steam or air so it doesn't explode. There we go. First one done. Now before I put these into the oven, I'm just going to whisk up an egg. I'm just going to do a light egg wash over these just so that when they cook they get this nice golden colour. Now I'm going to put mine in the oven at 160 degrees Celsius fan forced, and if it's not fan forced, 180 degrees Celsius. You just want to make sure that these don't overcook, but just they'll be ready when they are nice and crispy and golden looking on top. Now Now I just put my meat mixture straight in these, but if you would like to, you can add extra fillings such as cheese, which is quite popular. My meat filling has plenty of flavor, so I'm not worried about flavor at all there. So I'm happy with just my meat sauce. I also have some extra mixture left over. When these are cooked, I'll take these out of the pie tins and I can repeat the process again. If not, you can freeze this for use at a later date, bring it out, defrost it, and make some pies. Up to you, or just have it as a delicious stew. All right, so I've taken these first two out. The ones on the bottom shelf made a bit longer, and they're looking incredible. Like the smell, I love puff pastry. It looks fantastic. Now, as I said before, you can let these cool down a little bit, take them directly out of their pie tins, and then of course as well, freeze it, eat it, do whatever you'd like. And yeah, of course, top it with some tomato sauce. That's a very traditional Aussie way to eat this. But yeah, thank you for watching my delicious Aussie classic meat pie. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.